Well, all new at 8, did you know that your relationship with food can actually be affected by any childhood trauma that you've experienced? How we relate to our body, emotions, others, even ourselves, all impacts the way we relate to food. Dr. Julie is here this morning with more on this. And Dr. Julie, good morning to you. I think that so many of us are aware that if we've got some kind of a childhood trauma, it can affect us in our adult life. Help us understand how it's connected to our relationship with food.
Sure. So complex trauma absolutely does affect us in adulthood. We're going to talk in this series about how specifically it shows up affecting your relationship with food in adulthood. So let's start out by what's the difference between adult trauma and complex trauma? So complex trauma occurs in your early years, your formative years, when you are developing your sense of self, how you respond to your emotions, how you relate to the world. Okay? If you've had complex trauma, you have been chronically exposed to traumatic material that's been too much for your psyche to manage, okay? Then we have to somehow adapt, and that affects our relationship with our body and ultimately our relationship with food.
Give me some examples. I mean, when you say complex trauma, are you talking about abuse? Are you talking about somebody just being unkind to you? What do you mean by complex trauma?
We're talking about multiple and interrelated abuse. So it could be sexual abuse, it can be physical abuse, it can be neglect, it can be domestic violence. So too much for your tender psyche to handle.
I think this is such an interesting subject, Dr. Julie, because again, I don't think anybody is naive to the fact that our childhood can affect our adulthood and, you know, maybe how we respond in relationships. But help me understand and help everybody at home understand what the warning signs are that trauma is affecting our relationship with food.
So how many times do we talk about eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full, as one of those intuitive eating skills, right? If you've had unresolved complex trauma, you are not readily able to connect with your body, including its sensations of hunger and fullness. Now, this might sound, you know, unusual, but it's called interoceptive awareness. It's a lack of ability to connect to your body's signals. You don't know what you're feeling as far as hunger, fullness, or your emotions.
And so where do we even start to, you know, draw a boundary with ourselves?
So I think recognizing. So the first thing is, if you are trying to eat according to hunger signals and you're not able to tell if you're hungry or full, think maybe I've had some trauma that has to be resolved. If you're working on emotional eating, what am I feeling? And you're not able to readily discern what that is, you might need to start exploring, has there been complex trauma?
And once you explore that and you recognize it, then what?
Well, we're going to talk about that in our next part, so part 3. But I'm going to talk about 2 more warning signs, if that's okay.
Sure, of course.
So if we all turn to friends, interpersonal relationships for support. If that is overwhelming for you, if intimacy feels very vulnerable and scary, and we turn to food and we isolate, that might also be another warning sign. And then also, if you compulsively turn to food. This is not about liking food too much. This is about automatic pilot eating, binging and purging, maybe starving to numb yourself, and you're not sure why. We have to start asking ourselves the question, is there something that's unresolved?
Got it. Recognition. I liked what you said about that, is recognizing it is always the first step. Dr. Julie, thanks for the important conversation. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Important information.